Hello, good morning, and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike.
Happy Tuesday.
There we
Always.
go.
Like
Always
the sun rises.
Even
Happy Tuesday.
when it is Tuesday, it's only Happy Tuesday on Tuesdays. Don't let Tommy fool you. He wants me to say it every day.
No, I don't. I just want to make sure you know for the future. This is beginning to remind me of the Spaceballs. Now we're looking at now. When? Just then. When did it happen? Just now.
Who's on first?
Yeah,
Who's on first? What's on second? Excellent. Well, this is going to be a recorded episode. People are traveling around, going different places. So, sorry we're not live today. Things have been busy. Apparently, conferences are back on, and people are moving all over the place these days. So, stuff's happening. Anyways, that being said, we'll get right into the topic for today. We're running an article from, what's the gentleman's name? I actually didn't catch the name on there per se.
Ryan Dolly at
Ryan
the
Dolly.
Super Data blog.
Ooh.
Yeah, which
Super Data.
I like. I like the
Yeah.
the blog name there, Super Data. So, talking a little bit more around the second age of analytics and why it's ending, why we're moving on to like the third age of analytics, which I think is actually very timely and appropriate. Was seeing that every other day there's like another article about some more AI that's being populated somewhere across the ecosystem. So it may trickle its way into data and BI and insights.
Yeah, this is going to be one of those that's I think going to be difficult for us to just stick to the blog like this
The
first article because it's in a series and he already put out the second, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
this one is a precursor, and I think we'll end up talking about the other two as well. But it sets the stage for I think a lot of the history of analytics or business intelligence in general, and like why we are where we're at. And I think it does a really good job of it.
I'd agree with that as well. Let's jump in. Link will be in the description below of the episode, so you'll be able to catch the link there and see what we're talking about there. And then let's jump in. Let's just talk about. He kind of opens with the history of analytics, and I think this is another. He starts talking about like in the early 200s, we saw all these monolithic data warehouse activities. And
Early 2000s, you mean?
Or did I say 200s?
Yeah.
Yeah, the 200s.
Power
really,
BI has
really
been
big.
a lot longer than I thought.
When we were on
when we would-
stone tablets.
On stone tablets, we'd
and
chisel
we
in
know
our
this.
data.
Could not get your x-axis wrong, or you'd be in
Oh man, you spend a lot more time thinking about what you needed to build when you chiseled it in there because it was permanent at that point. The guys who had to, when you clicked on the bar chart, it just took forever to get the results because they had to chisel it all out again.
Yeah. Dude had to go in the cave with his paints and
put the whole new meeting to data to ink ratio.
Yeah, exactly. Oh goodness, sorry. 2000s. I remember working in the 2000s. I remember doing work against a database. Business Objects was very applicable. We had teams in IT that would manage the entire data warehouse. You had to go reach out to them to get access to information. There was a whole bunch of SQL laying around SQL servers. I wasn't allowed to touch them. You had to go through some other kind of interface or UI, but it was like this web browser-based UI. You could kind of grab and drag and drop your fields. I just remember people making lots of tables and exporting them. Like that was like the main goal. Make a table and export.
Yeah, you still had a bit of the personal BI, and then obviously enterprise BI was completely different, but personal BI was just Excel.
Yeah.
And at least from my experience was as an analyst was just taking like the same thing, going to an intranet, exporting the data, putting it in a folder, and that would be the historical data.
That's
but
it.
all we were connecting to is Excel, and that's how we shared. And honestly, from a reporting point of view, from a personal BI point of view, was slides, was a presentation to the team on a weekly basis. It was not any consistent report. It's how are we doing now this week? Put that in a PowerPoint based on the latest analysis. That's how I started.
I think what's cool to me is we're the folks that came in with Excel and Word, and by the time we hit business, like that was pretty standard, Like at least in its infancy versions, right? Like even in grade school, like that's what you start learning on, and that was revolutionary, and that's where we start with reporting a lot. But what I love is he takes it like one step back, where wave one being enterprise reporting ultimately like was the real, how he puts it, is the real world process into the digital space, where we actually started converting all of, like, think about this, businesses ran on paper,
I know.
right? Like, which is
I had an interaction with
was
a company who ran on
paper-
Greenbar, and that was
paper-
like recently, but that was like,
Well,
what
yes,
is
it was.
this?
Paper to
Yeah.
computer, right? And ultimately, when you look at some of the core systems and the ways reporting was done, it was revolutionary at the time,
hmm
right? And he goes into like, what are the core components of that, right? Like there's a single model, there's a single way that you're taking business processes and data that comes in one way, right? Prompts are like inputs, kind of like parameters, like very specific things that people can, like, they could thousands of pages of documents, and it's
Yeah.
like, I want to see this customer, and then the data comes up, right?
That's actually a really good point, because I think you make it really, like, we started on paper to begin with, right? It was kind of,
Right.
I mean, it was paper reporting kind of to start with, and everything was made to design that. And then we started introducing like the web, the computer screen, and then the computers became more capable. And then we started taking computer systems to replicate what we were producing on paper. And then eventually the paper got removed altogether, and now we're only looking at screens.
The fact,
Right.
what blows my
Remember
mind is the
Okay.
fact that we're not already on a 4-day work week. Like, can you imagine like how inefficient businesses were with mail, like mail rooms, people walking around with mail? And what is it now? Like, one of his point, distribution. Everything's in email now.
Mhm.
That's
I
true.
get a report.
Actually-
And this is why I think it became so important, and why you still have people who are like, yeah, email me the report, as opposed to just clicking and going and get it somewhere,
Mhm.
because of this mentality that like it shows up in my inbox. And it's almost interesting to me that, like, I think people are finally fed up to the point where it's like, there's too much email. There's
Yeah.
too much coming in my
Yeah.
inbox now that I can't manage. And hopefully we like get out of this pivot of like, email it to me. Like, no,
Right.
it's just going to be this
Well,
wasteland.
you said
You're
this.
going to start
Yeah,
ignoring it.
you
Well-
said distribution, and I was thinking of the same, in the same coin, like the communication of data. Did you guys back in the day ever print out a report and then actually walk over to hand it to somebody? Because that's what we used to do. We would
Did you
print it.
really?
We would print it out, and then we would hand it to the chief marketing officer. We would hand it to someone on the chief.
Mhm.
But it was literally like the physical walk, and that was communication. And then we had to
Yeah.
explain what it showed, because there was no whatever from the distribution from a digital point of view.
Mhm.
And think about where we're at now. And Seth, to your point with email, I think a lot of internal orgs are going away from email with Slack and Teams.
Okay, I was going to go. Okay,
So
that's
like
where I
a
want to
lot
go
of
with this.
live communication. right?
Yeah.
So, Seth, you were saying like, okay, we did a bunch of these email things. People would move around letters. Now we're getting away from letters. Now we're getting bombarded with email. Now there's so many emails, people are overwhelmed. And so now the preferred communication is now, let's go to a messaging system.
Right.
And now I just saw the other day, a AI-based response
Oh boy.
thing that will
Yeah.
let you do like LinkedIn and I don't know, some other program, but it was like an AI-based thing that would auto respond to messages or other things. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, well, with that integration coming, now my messaging system, whatever that is going to be inundated with data. And I was watching Linus Tech Tips the other day. And they're like, yeah, you can now take an email response, you can run it through AI, and you can say, generate a happy response like this. And you can say, the answer is no, generate a happy response. And it will generate like 5 sentences of thank you for your reply. I don't think that's appropriate. And then it'll just give you the answer. But you can literally give it like the shortest amount of information and it will generate. So we're now going to have like, we're only going to talk in like,
Mike,
yes, no, yes, no. But all
Mike,
the AI will generate everything else.
Mike, you and I need to create a Seth prompt for email.
What does that mean?
It would be very simple.
It's how
Say
Seth
no.
would reply to an email.
Oh my gosh.
No, that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a good idea. That's all it would say. It's so simple. Done.
Seth
Ship it.
AI.
Why are you saying hi to me? just get to the point.
Mhm.
Like, just, what's your question?
I
Cut
know
out the
I'm
fluff.
Seth.
Let's
Thank
what
you.
we're trying to get
Hi,
to.
Seth. You emailed Seth. This is Seth.
I forget if one of you guys sent me the cartoon where, or if I saw it online, where it was the first panel was, you know, the guy doing something similar, like, oh, generate this email that says, you know, use AI to generate this email to whatever. And then the
Yeah.
next panel was like, oh, look, I've set up this generative AI to like read these really verbose long emails to condense it down for me. It's
Yes.
like, what
Yes.
the heck did we just do with AI, right?
Instead of just asking the question and getting an answer, yes or
Yeah,
no, we have
right.
these AI generating all this verbose words. So we'll have one side generating all the verbose words, the other side reading the verbose words and summarizing it. And literally the people on either end will just be like, yes,
Yeah.
no, yes, no.
Yeah, right. And
I
then the
think that's
world
where
does
AI
become
breaks
like Seth's world.
Seth's world. Anyways,
Uh,
that's and that's what I mean. I think what he talked to your point there earlier, though, talking back about the curated library of insights, right? That early 2000s was where we started talking about all these things. Like he has a lot of terms here that I think I resonate with: centralized metrics modeling,
Yeah.
giving variable prompts, input these variables, get out standard reporting pieces.
And all those are like, they're fantastic points, right?
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
server based, right? Like
Yep,
all of a
server-based,
sudden, all this
centralized.
was in a central location where
Yep.
people could manage it.
Mhm.
You could create a consistent experience, right?
Yeah.
You centralize security and you make it auditable, right?
Yeah.
Like all of the sudden, all of these massively important enterprise side tools are there.
Yeah.
And that was the backbone for
Mhm.
all data within organizations. And that's like when I got started, it was definitely in that realm, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
we have all this centralized data, and you have tons of processes to back up and restore, disaster recovery, etc., because they're so integral to the business. But then at the same time, it requires highly technical folks, right?
Right.
Yeah. The technical level got way higher there at that time. I agree with that 100%. You're now dealing with SQL servers and database administrators and all this technology that had to get involved.
Yeah.
So you had to make a direct investment on these people to hire those skills because this was a brand new technology that was required to be administered.
And I think for most folks, right, that's also what caused the most frustration from the business side was a lot of those, like, as the importance and availability of business intelligence and data to analyze became
Mm.
more commonplace through different tools. You know, for me, it was reporting services, right,
Mhm.
in SQL. The business started to realize the value there, but was still locked behind IT producing those results for them,
Mm.
right? And then, and I think that's where the advent of access databases and Excel really became a thing in the business, because as that data became available to them in reporting, right? If it's reporting services reports, like essentially they just use those outputs as sources of information to go build their own stuff anyway,
Yeah.
because they needed that information quicker and faster than IT people were willing, and IT meaning
Willing or
business
able.
intelligence folks were
Yep.
using source systems just to generate that for them.
Well, and it kind of goes right in the face of the common conception or conception that organizations are data illiterate, where even from back then they wanted to contribute, provide feedback, provide suggestions, and also adjust the data, but they were at the mercy of whatever SSRS report they had. That was not going to change in a week if they
Yeah.
needed an update, which is why they needed those exporting, which is why they needed that hybrid, or the idea of the hybrid between that data savvy Excel person to provide something that can they adjust and be flexible with, which was already a need back then too. That's not anything new with what we do now.
I wouldn't say it's not new. It's just I think what we're seeing now though is there's this, again, I'm gonna let's keep going through the article a little bit here. So I think he has this idea in the article, like the very first section is, wave one was enterprise reporting, all these curated insights. People, I sat down and took time, which is something we don't have a lot of now, taking time to identify what is important to the business. Really thinking about how your data is stitched together. I think there was a little bit more of a concerted effort around modeling. And then he starts talking about like wave two. And so in wave 2, he starts introducing the concept of here's Tableau, here's Power BI. These tools allow you to go grab data from wherever. And now the business can start exploring those data pieces, like doing some of the work that IT previously would have done. And I think that was one of my main complaints when working with like the centralized data BI models was it took so long for me to explain what I wanted out of the information to an IT organization to produce the data warehouse or the tables that I needed to get information out. And sometimes, I mean, frankly, I didn't even know the questions to ask at this point, right? I mean, I know there's data in there. I don't know what it tells me. And IT comes to me and says, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, I don't know yet. I haven't had enough time to look at the information to tell you one way or the other. Like, maybe I need it aggregated by product. Maybe I don't. Maybe I just need to look around the information for a bit. So I feel like there was a lot more discovery that needed to happen. And sometimes we had to come into these large enterprise systems with what is the final solution? And I didn't know yet. I needed more time to discover and plan out what that engineering of data would look like.
I wonder if the challenge there, or where the value kind of broke down, is the lack of what organizations thought they needed. And allow me to expand on this. We've talked about this quite a bit, where there's a lack of like set titles in our industry. Like, what's a BI analyst? What's a BI developer? What's a business intelligence manager? All those don't really have a set name. And I think a lot of times, or what's really caused friction, is people understand what they need something, they don't know what they need, and there's a lot of people who either don't have the skills yet or they're ill-defined. And I think that a lot has to do with the titles, or a lot has to do with, we need a BI person, but they really don't know exactly what that it calls for.
I'm not sure yet. I mean, I do think there are courses and actually programs that you can get run through that are, analysts or, classes or specific skill sets around data analytics, right? There are data analytics. I get a master's in data analytics.
Sure.
I think those help to some degree. I do feel like we sometimes miss the forest from the trees. I guess in some cases we focus on certain things that are not really impacting the broader type of the business. So sometimes I feel like when I walk into these situations, we're not asking the right questions, right? And I think this is where what we've talked about recently in the podcast was all this OKR stuff, right? What is the goal you're trying to reach, and what does the data look like in addition to that goal? And I think when I've done reports with organizations who understand their goals, what is the expectation of your company, right? If we're going to grow, revenue by 10%, we would expect our operational costs to grow by 8%, right? There's some kind of math there that, like, we as we acquire new business, we should be efficient enough to be able to acquire new business without acquiring additional costs or a lot of extra costs to do the work. There's a ratio there. And so people who understand that concept, I think you get better reporting around tracking what really matters, right? If you see revenue generating by 10% and you're increasing costs by 11%, okay, now we have a problem, right? To acquire more work, we're now incurring more effort to do that work. That's not the right way to go.
Right.
It's high level concept like that I think people need to apply more.
Well, I think especially in this desktop analytics age, there was immature goals for what BI should do. And I think then you got immature skills in that. And I think I was part of that too. Think about if someone's going to invest in a marketing team, they know what they want to get out of that. And I think in this age, when people said they needed BI, they weren't necessarily sure what they wanted to get out of that, which I think that caused a lot of skills that weren't totally related to what they needed.
I think that's a really good point, because even as I agree with wave 1, wave 2, and where we're going with wave 3 potentially, right? Where are the vast majority of business users? Are they actually in the wave, and can they can they communicate in that style? And I would argue no, the vast majority are still in 1, because tables are what it was. However, the challenge I have where we start to talk about like the transition from wave 1 into 2 is that I don't think is addressed in the article. And as we're talking about it, I want to voice to see your opinion is right. So the transition is essentially from taking reports, and the generation from them was designed to replicate what was known to people, which is a piece of paper.
Mhm.
right? Like we've developed now reporting that is mimics the same thing, but it's much more valuable, provides a lot more insights to you. And now, like the transition is, well, people are so used to computers now that the screen or the dashboard is much more a much more agile and better way to produce those insights because it can be interactive, right?
Mhm.
And people can find their own answers by clicking on a few things as
Yep.
opposed to just have something generated for them. And I agree that's like extremely powerful. But the question I posit is is Wave 2 actually tools like Tableau? Or was the advent of Wave 2 actually when Excel got buried into the business? Because from my perspective, Excel was the method by which business started to take off and diverge from IT to solve the immediate problems that they had, which is why it became, I think, so wildly popular because it created the framework by which you could create your own calculations, by which you could work with, in those terms, very large sets of data, right? And then pivot and look at data in different ways and aggregate it. Like, is that a valid thought here? Before the advent of like all these cool tools
So
that allow us to visualize data, which I think is I'm not demeaning, but
no,
I almost wonder where the pivot, where we separated back out and the business actually had the opportunity to run without IT as much as they possibly could, but we're still bound by the source systems.
I think there's a fundamental difference there where when Excel became more prominent, that's like when they made in football the forward pass legal, but by no means was that prominent. I think the change with like Tableau and Power BI that really brought us into the new wave was the access to the data. Because even with Excel, you still had to export these files. You probably didn't actually have access to the source. And I think that the large change was when you can actually directly connect to those sources and then create something that would be in a sense the automation that it can refresh. That to me is where that large, you would say, where the cliff is, or where the
Okay. So
oh
for the vast majority of business users, what is their primary data source for Power BI?
Well, before we go data sources, I want to jump on your comment there real quick,
yeah.
Seth. I think I'm very much with you, Seth, in this concept of it's not Power BI or Tableau per se. I think there's two fundamental things that I think, Tommy, I'm going to jump on your comment as well, right? The two things that revolutionized why the business is now doing more of their things on their own was this language called M,
Mm-hmm.
which was a graphical interface that allows you to do simple transformations on top of data
Right.
things. So I think your point is well taken. It doesn't matter what the source is, but I think the
Right.
tooling in place, that's what was my hook.
The ability to access and transform.
That was my hook to say this next wave of tooling is really cool. So
Yeah.
I think again, I'm gonna go high level here for a minute. Like the wave that we're talking about here is there is this low code, no code tooling solutions that are continually popping up. It's Power Apps, it's Power BI. It doesn't. Those are what Microsoft's tools are. There's a lot of other tools that are low code or no code stuff as well. Like my son, I caught him yesterday. He was upstairs programming. He's like, I'm trying to build a little funny app that plays a sound when I press a button. But he's using Scratch. It's block coding, right? You put these little blocks of code together, and it has the statements in there. But you're now not writing actual code. You're dragging information across and saying, these are the actions I'm going to do, and here's what that line of code will run. There's more code behind it, but it's allowing him to be able to like that. But that's what I'm seeing things are going to move towards. And the further we go down this computer realm, you're seeing more and more abstraction layers away from the hard coded writing actual code. You're doing more of this generalized coding. So I think a couple things that again, that's M and DAX, right? But the real pivotal moment for me around this one, why does Wave 2 look much more attractive? It's Microsoft bundled up an incredible tool called Analysis Services and threw it away to people for free. To me, that's the linchpin. It's the modeling. It's this functional language that we already understood. Excel introduces concept of functional language. Excel introduces concept of using cells to write a function to sum and aggregate. So this functional language piece is something that we're very familiar with and people are very comfortable with. So that's been 30 years of investing in people learning a functional language. And oh, by the way, we're now bringing analysis services, another DAX language that is also functional, and does basically a similar thing. But now we're going to give you this IT. So I would purely consider analysis services an IT tool. But Microsoft bundled it up, made it in a package that's easier to build, and said, here you go. Here's Power BI with this analysis services for free in this tool. And I think to me, that was the big moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. It's the framework by which
the model.
all of it works, right? I guess my point was I would have started the transition with Excel, and we went to the opposite spectrum where I agree with him in the fact that Power BI is the accelerator for Wave 2. Like I think it took over. There is no argument now that it took the backbone of like what Tableau introduced to businesses and just ran with it and made it much more powerful because of the things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Ease of connections, like doing your own ETL, cleaning up data,
relational
adding it
model
into a model where all the like I have just really almost limitless ability to like handle almost the vast majority of any business situation, right? Like we hit the limits, but we're also like throwing enterprise level data at the thing and it still supports it.
Yeah.
So the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
to your point, Mike, the spectrum of just how much power there is in here, I absolutely agree with.
And
but
the fact that I don't have to write like SQL, like the fact that I can do all that without writing like hundreds of lines of SQL code to get an answer out, right? That's the point,
the ease
right?
of use, right?
The ease of use has gone really up.
And that's a great point I think he makes in the Wave 2 transition, right?
Yes.
Was Wave 2 allowed a way around IT and really make analytics for the analyst, like tools for them that can be created by them, right? So, both of these tools do it, but yes, we love Power BI for that reason. And I like there is no competitor to that right now.
No.
And you said it. He said it there in the article.
Yeah.
It's an end run around IT, right? It was power to the business people. Here's a tool that doesn't need a lot of extra coding power. Here you go. This is where I hate the term, but people use it all the time. It's shadow IT. Is it really shadow IT, or is it just people looking at insights? And I was, for a period of time, I called myself, oh yeah, I'm the shadow IT person, right? I'm in Excel building all these things. And I'm like, I don't really like that term because the business is the people who needed the data to begin with to make things actionable and usable.
Yeah.
So to call us shadow IT, it's almost like a slap on the wrist. Like, you don't know what you're doing. You're shadow IT. But is that really what's occurring here, or is it the tooling?
But here's the thing, right? Like you say that, and you don't like it, but yet one of the coin phrases we have is think like the business, act like IT.
Agreed.
It's both of those things, though, and I think that this moniker of like shadow IT comes around where you have business folks that aren't thinking about the things that they're building or their processes in ways that we would term IT or development centric, and you get yourself into trouble there.
Well, we're finally, I think, from the BI point of view, evolving out of the IT space. I heard a friend, I've told them what they've done, and they explained to someone else, oh, he works with computers. So we're still in that. So we're still in the IT, like people still consider us in the IT space. And I've said this from episode 1. I don't think we're IT, what we do.
I think to your point though, Seth, I mean, I agree with your statement there. I do disagree with the term shadow IT because I think the data is now just moving closer to the business side. And now I do agree that there are different, there are like, and this is where I like a lot of the governance piece of the talk, right? There's a lot of data that needs to be just needs to be built. It doesn't need a lot of rigor to it.
Technically, we're all huge proponents of shadow IT, according to Wikipedia.
But that's a true statement.
Basically, it says in big organizations, shadow IT refers to information technology systems deployed by departments other than the central IT department to work around the perceived or actual shortcomings of central information systems.
There you
go.
Shadow
IT often introduces security and compliance concerns. Yes, we are huge proponents of shadow IT. Actually, forget it. The whole conversation. We are shadow IT.
but while I understand that, right? I think, and this is where I would argue the role of IT has now changed, right? So
I would agree it should be changing.
And that's, I think, if organizations who realize the role of IT is now adjusting, and I am no longer the IT group that has to build the data, build the models, build the cubes, build the universe, build whatever the things, and then output a single page or allow users in the business side to drag and drop variables together to make a report, right? I think
But I agree with this, and this
yes,
is why cloud platforms like Azure are so powerful for businesses, because if your centralized IT owns the tenant,
yes,
you can provide these services in a security compliant way to all these business units, right? If your business unit wants to spool up the service and it's useful for them, go for it.
Yep.
IT doesn't care. They don't need to get involved, but they would control who has access. They would
correct.
control the costs. They would be having those conversations with you,
Yep,
right?
yep.
And
Yeah.
that's where something like that, I think, is much more like a much better design. And there's got to be like people who are way beyond the management of and structure of those things, but that's the scale that I think businesses in general are pursuing now, as opposed to the way shadow IT was, because in the past there was no workaround. There was no
Mhm.
way to do something. So you just have a business unit be like, I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
create my own source of information, which would be hugely problematic for an organization because they
Totally.
wouldn't have access to any of that.
Well, here's the interesting thing about the new age we're going into. If you think about the first age, second age was the need for access. And now that's no longer, in a sense, I don't want to say it's a need because it's a given. And one of the things Ryan says is kind of this new age is we're going to tools and solutions that are a narrow way to tell a story, which is interesting because we went from narrow because we had to with Excel. We went from wide with Power BI, where it's like all the data, which we
Mhm.
had to reports that, and now with the biggest issues were overlap. And according to Ryan, we're going to go to a narrow scope again because we need, not because that's the
Mm,
only access we have.
I don't know if that's what he's proposing, but I'm sure we'll talk about his second article.
I think, yeah. So that to be continued.
What was Mike, the one point you really liked was his representation of the wave 2 in like a logistics
Yes, a
pattern.
pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked his analogy of think of it like a truck, right? You know, we've hyper made an efficient pipeline to get data from where it was living, change, you know, get it on a truck and deliver it to the house, right? So basically, it's like a logistics company, right? They've become an Amazon of data, right? There's data living somewhere, someone's producing. The data's being generated somewhere. It's getting stuck on a truck, and then we're able to funnel it over, pipe it out to individual houses where people can consume and use that data. So I thought it was a very good analogy. When we start talking about wave 3, there's definitely going to be new tools showing up. It's going to be very interesting to see. Again, I think we're on a cusp of people are trying to not throw away anything that's wave 2, but they're trying to supplement wave 2 tools with wave 3 type technology, right? I'm thinking like these are like AI, this is chat GPT, this is analyzing models. Like there's some crazy, really good models that can analyze your Excel sheet and spit out a whole bunch of insights. And you can ask questions about your Excel sheet and it just tells you how it's being done. So the stuff that it's going to be able to do here in the near future is going to be mind blowing because I think these new language models, large language models,
We hope
really help.
right?
Well, we've seen a lot of failed attempts so far, right? We've seen a lot of really, AI based features inside Power BI today that are just not very useful. Which I think it's good though. That means at some point something's going to stick.
I think if you look at the points of the challenges of wave 2, he is spot on. There are a lot of things that we've talked about, right?
Yeah.
Like these centralized warehouses full of unused and unwanted data, brittle pipelines that fail, dozens or hundreds of dashboards that have slightly different metrics, right? Conflicting records or metrics, like, which is the bane of Tommy's existence. Extreme duplication of work or data content, right? Like, and these are a lot of the things that we talk about on the podcast as far as implementation and how do you solve this and whatnot. So, hey, if somebody creates a tool to solve those problems, right? But it would be great because this is like, I think one of the biggest wastes of current wave 2 is you have this enterprise knowledge and this like a great theory of centralizing data butted up against the business taking off and analysts building their own things. And how do you elevate that into a realm of like these teams working together, i.e. the business getting the most value out of the data that it has across these tool sets? And right now there's just a lot of disconnected pieces that we're trying to figure out.
I'd agree with that. Well, I think we've gone through a pretty good job on this first Super Data blog. The article is really around, the future of business intelligence and where we're going to start here. So I think this is a very good article. I think we're ending the age of the second age of analytics. We're looking at there's going to be some new innovation coming across here that's going to be very interesting, and we'll see where it goes. It'll be pretty fun. If you like this conversation, if you liked what we're talking about here, if this added some value to your day, you like reading the article, you like thinking about these kind of things, this is the water cooler conversation around Power BI and data things. We'd love for you to engage the conversation. Feel free to chat on the comment on the video. And our only ask, if you get all this content for free, is just to let somebody else know that you like this kind of content. Share with somebody else. Put down your thoughts. Share on social media. What do you think about the second age of analytics? Give us some other thoughts there. We would love to hear those comments as well and your thoughts on this topic. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find it on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, anywhere they're available. Make sure to subscribe on Apple and Spotify. Leave a rating. Helps us out a ton. If you want to join the conversation live, join the community, you can do so every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central on PowerBI.tips social channels.
Excellent. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.